My parents made a serious mistake one day when I was about 4 years old. I thought it was good to be specific because they may be watching and think I was about to litigate the many mistakes that they did make. This specific mistake was that they allowed me to borrow, in air quotes because I never gave it back, a VHS tape of a certain film. I watched this film to death as a kid, and it features a climactic and impressive space battle at the end, which completely opened my mind to so many different things. Like, my childhood interest in space stuff was probably because of me watching this film, which informed later choices and probably led to me doing physics at university and a series of mistakes that were entirely my own fault. As well as some really good decisions. It wasn't all bad, and I did get my degree, even if it was a bit like pulling teeth at times. But that's how that went. There are many cool space battles depicted across different types of media, and it's something that can really take advantage of a lot of interesting facts about space, mostly that it's big. I like it when space stuff is big and wildly impractical, which did get me thinking. What makes a space battle good? And is there an example that contains all of the elements that I'd have fun talking about? So, what's the aim here? Well, I want to tell you which battle is the one that I think is the best and contains all of the key elements of a great space battle. This did require me to ask in my Discord for examples that people really liked, and we'll dive into some of those in the next section. But in essence, a significant part of my last fortnight has been spent watching and reading about space battles. I've loved it, to be honest. This is the kind of shit I love doing in my spare time. What this was all in aid of was trying to find whether the examples I found, or the ones that people had sent in, had something in common. Was it just that they looked super pretty and were a giant spectacle, or was there something more going on? And if there was, could I find the one that did it the best? In my opinion. But I think my pick is actually relatively uncontroversial and maybe even a bit too safe. Maybe I should have been more adventurous. Even so, I'm going to enjoy talking about it. The answer I landed on was also the inspiration for even offering this topic to the patrons and members as an option for them to vote for. Just a little subtle hint, which does sound convenient and possibly fueled by nostalgia, but I feel like I can argue the case, and I'm really happy to do so. It was the Battle of Endor at the end of Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, probably the single Star Wars film I've watched the most in my life, although now I think about it, the thumbnail probably gave that away. That was the VHS my parents let me borrow permanently, and I think it's uncontroversial as a pick, but it does present a series of dilemmas about how I should look at this, how did I evaluate this, and what do I think is important based on what people sent in and what the Battle of Endor has going for it and against it, according to some people. When I started watching these space battles, I was watching them with my friend, and she made the case that the only correct way to evaluate the best space battle was to only look at the space battle itself. So you get all of the pretty space stuff and all of the lasers and the cockpit and bridge shots, but none of the extra stuff if it was coinciding with, say, a stealth operation on a nearby planet. Which means that the only stakes would be those established in the battle itself. You would be freed from expressing an opinion about the rest of the film or the TV show or whatever else that battle was a part of, which, to be honest, in this case, might have been a blessing if I'd gone for it. That would also open the possibility to, a terrible film that has a good space battle. That methodology has plenty going for it. My counter to that was, yes, there does need to be, some hard boundaries around the space battle part of it. So, in the Battle of Endor, I don't think Luke losing his cool and absolutely battering Darth Vader is a part of the space battle. It's a very important moment for the narrative, but at that point, the actual space battle is irrelevant to it. There's no connection between what's happening there and what's happening in space. That doesn't mean that all that matters about a space battle is what happens during the battle itself. There's a whole build-up and a background to it that gives it the weight that it needs to have. That doesn't mean that the action alone isn't important, and actually I think I could probably have argued this using either way, but for me, when I was having this chat with my friend, it was obvious that material presented to us before the battle matters. Like, you can have a big, beautiful space battle with multiple moving parts and layers of action, but if you don't know anything about what's happening, or don't care, does it hit the same? I don't think so. An example we'll be talking about in a second will be the opening scene in Revenge of the Sith, and if you knew nothing about what was happening until then, yeah, this opening shot looks fucking cool, but anything can be a spectacle. My plan is to go with my instinct on how to look at this, because to be honest, the video where I go, that explosion looks so cool, might be a really fun one. Maybe we do a video about, like, the best explosions in space battles at some point, and it would probably be quite easy to write that, but it feels like I'm cheating a little, and honestly, I could talk about this stuff all day, so I'm going to indulge myself. Sorry, I get to go on massive tangents in this one, and you're going to have to live with it. When I started seriously looking into this video, I did two things. First, I just searched to see whether people had talked about this online before. Shocking twist, they had. And you can tell I'm not a strong reader because I had totally forgotten about books, because every single thing I found mentioned at least one Warhammer 40k book, which got me thinking about the categories these often fell in. But before I completed that thought, I asked my Discord which ones from a visual medium, I was very clear, don't send me books, that they thought were worthy of consideration. In a shocking twist from my server, it was a mix of stuff from Star Wars, Star Trek, Babylon 5, and mecha animes. What I found interesting from my Discord was that every single battle they suggested, except one, was from after Return of the Jedi was released. That exception is one that we'll actually talk about in more detail in a bit, because it's super relevant, it turns out, so it was really fortunate someone sent it in. In terms of categories, what I found fell into a few groups where I kind of had to reject two broad categories out of hand. Those being the anime, including Legend of the Galactic Heroes, which my friend mentioned and made me sit through a battle of, and the books. Sorry, poor reading has struck again, I'm sorry. The reason I'm dismissing the books is pretty simple. Theatre of the mind relies on your imagination, and while there's definitely writing that can convey the sensation of a cool space battle, I don't think a competition with other people's imaginations is going to be fair or really any fun for us. It just opens the door to way too much just like bickering. But I will say that they are cool, and I'm ditching the anime stuff and really just animation in general, anything that's pure animation, because it's kind of a different type of spectacle that can be produced purely through that sort of medium. One of the great and often touted benefits of animation is that you can just do things that are not possible in live action or with models or even special effects sometimes. Also, because a lot of what was sent to me was mecha anime, I think that has a different emphasis than what I'm looking at. Also, I will never watch a Gundam. I'm sorry, it will not happen. You can't make me, and you also can't make me read. So there, that's that. Those are the hard boundaries there. There were 3 battles that came up that I thought were of particular interest because they were from Star Wars and were kind of the most obvious points of comparison. I'm going to take them in release order because how they relate to Endor in that way, chronologically, is important to help us understand why I think Endor is the gold standard among them. The first one was actually sent in by someone in the Discord, which is the Battle of Yavin, which you'll probably know as the time they blew up the first Death Star. This was the only visual medium battle that was submitted that predated the Battle of Endor. And I think it's a little unfair to compare it to Endor just because of where it is in the narrative and the limitations that were clearly in place. Even with those limitations, you can see how Endor eventually happens. Not just because there's a Death Star, right? Obvious point of comparison, it's the big fucking moon thing. But because there are 2 things this battle does really well that Endor also does really well. One is it has enormous and well-communicated stakes. The Death Star has already blown up one planet, and if it gets a clear shot at Yavin 4, it's going to blow up the Rebel base before it can evacuate. Clear, simple, and while I'm not 100% sure why the Death Star had to approach the way it does, that timed aspect ratchets up the tension, it works really well. The second thing it has is payoff. Not only does Luke absolutely nail his shot, presumably cheesing it with the Force, but that's just the way he's playing that cards he was dealt, But we get a very cool explosion at the end, which I think is probably the peak spectacle of the whole battle. But I do want to call attention to one particular shot that I think is just really cool, which is the POV shot of entering the trench on the Death Star. I don't think they do something like this in any of the future films, and I kind of get why, but it's really cool. I think in the Rogue Squadron games, if I'm remembering correctly, they reused the shot when you go into your trench run. It's just iconic. It's iconic. There are some areas where I think it's not quite where I'd want it to be. The course of the battle is pretty static, aside from two moments, Darth Vader deploying and Han Solo coming back to save the day, which are very cool moments. And there aren't really a lot of interesting moving parts. It's a Hail Mary, and there aren't really a lot of different things going on. Which isn't to say that this would be improved by that. Sometimes less is more, a philosophy that certain films could have learned from. But overall, you can see the outline of how we end up with Endor here. The next two were ones I saw people mention online when I was doing my searching, probably Reddit if I'm being honest, but I thought they had something interesting about them we could relate back to Endor, both being parts of films released after Return of the Jedi. One battle that came up a couple of times was the opening of Star Wars Episode 3, which was the Battle of Coruscant, and it's easy to see why. Now, the film itself is a very 5 out of 10 film, and is the perfect example of liking something doesn't mean you think it's good. I mean, I like certain Limp Bizkit songs, which are also a good example of what I'm talking about. But to get back to Revenge of the Sith, what I'm saying is it's the Limp Bizkit of Star Wars. Now, if we look at this opening shot, we can see two Jedi starfighters diving into an incredibly busy space battle. To the extent that anything in the prequels conveyed the scale of a galactic war, this was it. It's big, bold, and just a very good way to kick off the best film of the prequels. And before anyone asks, on screen is my official ranking of all the Star Wars films released up until now. Feel free to be deranged about it in the comments. I'm not putting in the TV shows or series or anything like that. That's all you're getting from me. That's it. The key thing that the Battle of Coruscant does well is conveying that sense of scale. Like I said, it's hard to deny that it has plenty of spectacle, but if you look at the background of any single shot, you just see lots of moving parts, ships of different classes, explosions, and just the total chaos of what an actual battle is like, but in space. As far as payoff goes, it's not strictly the greatest, but it's hard not to love the line,
"Another happy landing."
You can see some of the elements of both Yavin and Endor in here, cockpit shots, the battle coinciding with an operation connected to the space battle, and once again, Palpatine / the Emperor watching a lightsaber fight while the supposed decisive battle of a war goes on around him. And yes, it is the decisive battle, and no, this isn't the video where I'm going to get into that. You'll have to take my word for it. In a very 5 out of 10 film, that opening shot and the intervening battle shots, even if they don't really make sense, like, I don't really get why they're firing on the ship with the Supreme Chancellor on it. They're pretty much the best that we get until Anakin broods in the council chamber about Palpatine being arrested. The other battle I saw mentioned took me by surprise, which was the battle over Scarif in Rogue One. I have to be honest, I didn't really remember much about this off the top of my head, so I had to watch it the most carefully. It was, much like Rogue One, fine. I think what this battle does really well, and incidentally what it also takes away from Endor, is this sort of multi-theater aspect. There's a space component, and then there's a ground-air component, and there's a shield around the planet. There's a narrow and specific mission that needs to be completed. I will give the actual space battle credit because it did answer a question that I think a lot of us have, which is what happens if a Star Destroyer crashes into another Star Destroyer? That's immensely satisfying, as is the fact that Hammerhead cruisers are canon now. Shout out to the KOTOR enjoyers on that one. You know who you are. It's a battle where you get more of a feel for the course of the battle shifting as they go through, right up until Darth Vader shows up, and, well, yeah, we all remember the hallway scene. If I was to boil down what I'm looking for into a simple list, just based on what we've talked about, I would summarize it like this: setup and stakes, spectacle, multiple coherent moving parts, a sense of the battle's course moving in either direction, the ultimate payoff. That's not going to be exhaustive. Obviously, Space Battle, I think, has to look good, and you can't just go for maximum spectacle with a ludicrously big space battle that has no narrative weight. Like, just imagine the battle for Earth in Mass Effect 3, but with none of the preceding games. Yeah, it looks amazing, but does it land the same? You can tell I'm replaying those games still, can't you? For a good reason. There's a reason I'm replaying them. Anyway, you see my point. All of these things have to be balanced and in coordination with each other in order to have the impact I was looking for when I had the idea to do this video. My plan is to use the second school of thought to evaluate the film instead of my friends, mostly because I didn't come up with it. And it also means I get to talk for longer. As I said, I think there do need to be some boundaries, so here are the rules. Nothing released after Return of the Jedi can be used to judge the Battle of Endor. I don't care if Episode 3 provides precedent for Palpatine being reckless with his personal safety. It's not something that could have impacted what happened in that film. The actual space battle part is going to be the primary focus, which includes any bridge and cockpit scenes, the actual bits with the spaceships doing stuff, anything where the battle is directly in the background or being spoken about or being impacted. I won't be including any stuff that's happening on Endor itself, so no Ewok Viet Cong tribute acts for you. And yeah, I get it, we're all very sad about that. Nothing after Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker actually crossing lightsabers counts on the second Death Star either. Once you get the big explosion at the end, I think a part of the payoff is the way the characters and the galaxy at large react to it. After the celebrations though, the battle is over. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay on Endor. With those rules in place, let's finally get into it for real and talk about how fucking awesome the Battle of Endor is. Let's do it. Let's establish the stakes at play in the Battle of Endor. Now, we could just look at the battle itself, and I'd be happy to do that, because plenty of stakes are established there. They're one shot at this, the Death Star is operational, it's obvious the rebellion is outmatched. If you've watched the film, you know that undersells the stakes to some extent. The narrative context of the battle as one part of the big confrontation at the end of the trilogy allows it to be this big tense affair where one component of the plan has totally fallen apart. But why has it fallen apart? Why does it need to be this big Hail Mary assault on a work-in-progress space station? Why would a rebellion that's largely portrayed as an overmatched ragtag group go for a direct assault? You see how all of this contributes to the battle's impact and the way it draws you in. One of the most important ways you can make the stakes matter is if it makes sense that the battle is taking place at all. There are some space battles, in fact, there's one I'm going to talk about in a second because I can't resist this drive-by, that don't leave any impression even if they're spectacular, just because it makes zero sense for any of it to be happening. Yes, I conceptually understand that a battle is important because the characters say it is, or because some great impact is demonstrated, but if none of it makes sense, then why do I care? If I wanted spectacle with minimal coherence, there are loads of films I could watch that have spectacle but make zero sense to me. I'm bringing this up because I have seen the Battle of Endor be, maybe blamed is the wrong word, but blamed is what look, I'm in an argument with a friend right now. You have to bear with me, but blamed for Starkiller Base in The Force Awakens because Return of the Jedi established apparently this idea that you can reuse the concept of a Death Star, which No, not really. I understand where this interpretation might come from, and it's because people rightly don't think it makes any sense for the First Order to have a planet-sized superweapon, but sort of interpolate that back to Return of the Jedi, claiming it doesn't really make sense for the Death Star 2 to be a thing, or for the Rebels or the Empire to seek this particular battle out. Like, I have some sympathy for how you might get to that point. It's certainly a reading you could make, and I can follow the logical trail. Unfortunately for the people who do that, they're wrong, because it's founded on a misreading of what's actually happening in both films and what the point of them is. To stick strictly to what's going on in the film, the key point is that based on what's shown to us prior to Return of the Jedi, it's within the institutional character of the Empire to build a second Death Star, and it absolutely makes sense within the narrative context of Return of the Jedi for this battle to take place. What is the institutional character of the Empire under Palpatine that we see? Well, it's largely complacency that leads to gross incompetence. Darth Vader isn't strangling... Sorry, not strangling. He's not literally strangling. Well, he strangles one guy, I guess. But force choking all those captains and admirals because they've done such a great job. They're not getting off on it, you know? There's only really one instance where he force choked someone for annoying him, and he was being shitty about the force, so, you know, chat shit, get banged. Don't say this in front of the fucking space wizard guy, you know? No matter how many people Darth Vader strangles... Not strangles, force chokes. I keep saying strangles. This is getting weird. The fact that these characters keep popping up and mistakes keep being made tells us there's something about the Empire that's producing or promoting these people. I suppose you might say that strangling the experienced officers isn't leading to good outcomes, but I'm not Vader's line manager, nor am I particularly interested in presenting that point to him directly. The interesting thing is that Vader is often the only character who takes threats seriously, which does explain his presence at the second Death Star. Also, let's be honest, people are scared of him, because who isn't going to be afraid of the space wizard who not strangles. I guess he does strangle them, but he does strangle some people, I guess. The sticking point comes when the Emperor arrives. Why is the Emperor there on a class of moon-sized space station that has a 100% record of being blown up when the rebels attack it? This feeds back into where we were before the Battle of Endor. So to briefly recap, the rebels blow up the first Death Star, which is a huge victory for them. They then lose Hoth, where they try to establish a base, and at the end of Empire Strikes Back, we're in this situation where the good guys have taken a bit of a beating. The continued existence of the rebellion and the fact that the Empire is building another annihilation sphere, which they believe will cow the rebellion into compliance, which we may not believe, but is nonetheless consistently the belief expressed by their officers and even the Emperor, tells us that we're in a position where the rebels can consistently escape and survive, but can't really land a blow on the Empire, and the Empire can't compel the rebels into an open battle where all those big, beautiful Star Destroyers and TIE Fighters can make a difference. This is what I mean by the battle has to make sense, because we have to believe that the rebels would take the bait and offer battle. A lot of history is characterized by people simply refusing to fight when they have a disadvantage. For example, the enemy might have the high ground, and the rebels are clearly at a disadvantage in any direct confrontation. Again, look at how Hoth turned out. In order to break the cycle, Palpatine feeds false intelligence that the second Death Star isn't operational, is likely protected, and that he's there. The rebels could not refuse that opportunity, because if the Death Star is completed, there's not exactly a great chance they repeat their heroics at Yavin. Also, based on the morality of the rebels presented to us, it seems unlikely that the planet Annihilator is something they could tolerate the existence of. This is in contrast to Starkiller Base, which is ridiculous for what's essentially a regional power to produce, and is really just there to increase the First Order's threat level, decapitate the New Republic's leadership and government, which I will point out shouldn't really be possible, and aid in the real purpose of The Force Awakens, which is being a beat-for-beat remake of A New Hope. none of which applies to the second Death Star or Return of the Jedi. I know that regional galactic power implies there are a lot of resources at their disposal, but the loss of the second Death Star as well as their leadership was deemed to be such a crushing blow to the Empire that we're meant to believe that they're sort of falling as a result of it. I don't care how advanced you are. A Death Star is a huge resource sink, and turning an entire planet into an honest-to-God superweapon is probably going to be beyond the First Order. Sorry about the rant. It just bothers me. It bothers me. I don't like the sequel films very much, but for the good reasons, not the dipshit reasons. If we want to argue about whether Palpatine being there makes sense given the massive personal risk to him, to quote Luke directly from the film,
"Your overconfidence is your weakness."
Which, of course, he is overconfident. The character of the Empire has to come from somewhere, and a fish rots from the head down. It's how this guy gets thrown down the reactor shaft in the first place. What we have is a big final confrontation between Luke and Darth Vader, really what this entire narrative has been building up to, running in parallel with the Rebels' last opportunity, at least as they frame it, and I get that it's like a bit of a narrative device, but whatever, to deal a fatal blow to the Empire. Obviously in the narrative we care about Luke watching the battle on the Death Star while the Emperor taunts him and is just having a great time. From a character perspective, that's what matters. On the other hand, Luke has arrived here prepared to die, and the reality is that that's probably what would have happened if things had taken just a bit longer. It was kind of convenient things wrapped up when it did, since this stuff is happening independent from the battle itself. Nothing that happens after Luke and Vader engage each other is changing anything really about the space battle. Really important character moments, but not really relevant to the course of the battle. In the macro picture, the thing that matters is what's happening outside of that weirdly small window the Emperor has Luke looking through. Is it weirdly small? I seem to feel like that window is kind of small. I don't know. Maybe it's not that small. Which gives it the weight it needs, especially once the Death Star turns out to be operational. In the course of the battle, that and the trap, which, we'll talk about in a sec, establishes its own stakes. The rebellion literally cannot withstand an extended engagement and needs everything to come together. One thing that's done well in this battle, well, there are a lot of things done well, but just in general, the three theaters of it, the space battle, the ground engagement, and the confrontation, they interlock with each other, and the battle actually has a flow that mirrors the shifts in these other scenes. They kind of move together in this really satisfying way. I really appreciate, especially in comparison to the Battle of Yavin, the way this battle has a lot of moving parts, but not so many that's like overwhelming. And it's done in a way that highlights the differences both in resources but also in doctrine that the Rebels and the Empire have. If you are a ragtag group of Rebels, you do need to focus on quality. It's probably your only route to victory. Alternatively, if you're a galaxy-spanning empire, you can probably have overwhelming numbers of not just like capital ships, which they clearly have, but fighters. And there's a great part where the Rebels get swarmed by the TIE fighters, but does a great job of conveying how overmatched they are in terms of numbers. There's a car alarm going off. I don't know if you can hear that, but if you can, I'm gonna put in a hard cut here. You also see it in how reckless the TIE fighters are. Odds are that the pilots on the disposable fighters aren't that good, which is why so many of them just crash into other ships or fuck up flying in tight spaces. You can see the practical impact of a difference in doctrine. The Rebels can fly, with some difficulties, through the Death Star, and TIE fighters eat shit in open space. The battle has a great scale to it that's really felt, because we have these different classes of ship. We have the Death Star, obviously, and we have all the fighters in close proximity to each other, which is counterintuitive to how big space is. And it's one of these weird paradoxes where you kind of have to restrain space in space to make it interesting, but it does have a reason, and it comes in the form of one of the big pieces of spectacle that the battle has to offer. As I said earlier, a part of what sells a space battle is that there should be spectacle. One of the Star Trek ones I got actually was from the 2009 Star Trek film, which was, again, another film where I'm like, that film was fine, I guess. I don't really have a desire to litigate those films at all. There's this part where the antagonist ship gets sucked into a black hole, and while I don't like Star Trek space battles because they're sort of detached and orthogonal to the point of the franchise. That was very cool. Now, Return of the Jedi is a film that's 26 years older than that, if I'm doing my maths right, and it's from a very different franchise, so I don't think it's a level playing field. Not saying the black hole ship isn't cool, it's just not going to compete for me, and I guess I watched one for the first time when I was 4 and the other when I was 15, so linear time just kind of had its impact there. All that being said, the big moment of spectacle I remember is when the Death Star turns out to be operational and blows up one of the larger Rebel ships. I remember being a kid and being like, what? It can hit ships? Though, to be fair, I also didn't really understand the trap at that age, so I'm really dunking on my child self here, aren't I? I mean, I'm just being unnecessarily mean to myself when I was 4 years old. It's a great way to shift the balance of the battle. The perception you get is as long as Han takes down the shields, that the rebels have a puncher's chance. Now, they're panicking and have to be calmed down from an immediate retreat that would have fucked the entire thing. It's a great use of spectacle to shift the feeling you have in a battle. The other great example of this is the Superstar Destroyer, which is so cool. But it got what I called in my notes 9/11, which is perhaps an unfortunate way to describe it, by this A-Wing. There's just something very cool about it slowly going down and then exploding right as everything is shifting decisively in the Rebels' favor. Setting aside the narrative justifications we can make for there being a second Death Star, I think the creative motivation, and I'm kind of forcing an analysis here maybe a little bit, but the creative motivation might have been a bit simple, which was, what if we did Yavin but bigger and better with a few more years experience and presumably more resources? Like I said, at Yavin you don't have multiple classes of ships, you only really have X-Wings and Y-Wings, Vader's TIE Fighter and the regular TIE Fighters. Obviously you have the Death Star too, but put that to one side, they have that in both. If you watch Endor's space battle, you see the medical frigate, what appear to be troop transports, B-Wings, A-Wings, Mon Calamari capital ships, the type of ship that the Tantive 4 is, as well as your X-Wings and Y-Wings, and on the Imperial side you have the Star Destroyers, the Superstar Destroyers, the TIE Fighters, and what appear to be TIE Interceptors. And for the record, I do know what every one of the ships is actually called, but I didn't put that in the script. But that's just a recipe for a lot more to be going on. I don't think we get any direct fire from the capital ships shown close up, which I guess is a legitimate reason to say it's not quite as layered as, say, the Battle of Coruscant. The best we get is some flashes as Luke's watching out the window that we assume is this going on. I don't think that's an unreasonable assumption given what we know about the battle. The trench run in this case has a different type of peril. Where they were being chased by Darth Vader and fired on by turrets before, now there's sort of this worming path through the Death Star, and there's not necessarily a guarantee they can actually fly through it properly. And I would say, given how badly the plan has gone so far, there's really no guarantee that, there is actually a path there, right? It's just so cool to see them fly through a still under construction Death Star. It has this kind of pace and constriction to it that the trench run doesn't. And even if the trench run is iconic and has those really cool shots, it's just another layer on an excellent battle overall. One thing I have seen said about the Battle of Endor that was intended as a criticism, it was in a video that I didn't make a note of, so everyone will have to forgive me if I don't link to it. So that's my bad, but the criticism itself stuck out, so there you go. They kind of dinged the battle because a lot of it happens in the background. Like those scenes with Luke and the Emperor, taunting him and, having a good time. That's what that means. And it's kind of a nothing burger criticism of the battle itself to say that part of it goes on in the background when other space battles have, extensive and extended cockpit and bridge scenes where the battle isn't really shown to us, but the reactions of characters are. It seems like an odd bit of criticism to make of a battle where in the sequence it's part of, it's spliced in and amongst a bunch of other stuff going on, like distant flashing lights while the Emperor's taunting Luke aren't meant to be the point in that particular bit. For me, the way the battle's enmeshed with these other theaters and the way they ebb and flow together adds to what makes it great, and it's by design. It would be one thing if they went for this big battle at the end and it was just kind of a mild engagement that went on while Luke was engaged in a Socratic dialogue with Palpatine. But that's not what's happened, and I don't think that's a good criticism, if you were asking me. The payoff is twofold. During the battle, you have this fantastic engagement that interlocks with the ground operation and the confrontation between Luke and Vader. You could probably watch all three of these different parts, the space battle, the ground operation, and the confrontation on their own, and they'd probably stand up just fine without the other parts. You have to acknowledge that part of this payoff is that there are these two other parts that do have relevance to the course of the space battle, but aren't 100% part of it. And it's still great, but it does lean a little bit on some other stuff. But like I said, I find the idea that the whole thing is it's singularly focused on the battle itself, I find it a weak criticism in this case. I can't really think of a single space battle that doesn't have these sort of extensive parts that aren't directly about the action. Regardless, the battle in and of itself is a payoff. Just so well executed, it's stuck in my mind for over 26 years now. It's great, no notes really, gold standard. The final payoff is that you do get to see the second Death Star explode, made all the better by the fact that you're aware of what was at stake here. The rebels have wriggled their way out of another jam, and now everyone gets to celebrate, including me, because now I get to see that the Ewoks may have decapitated the stormtroopers? Is that what's happened there? The celebration itself is just a solid wrapping up of the story. Now, I happen to somewhat and guiltily prefer the special edition celebration. Not the part with Hayden Christensen, though. I just want to be clear. Not that part. But I do prefer the song they use for it, and I also find the Gungans celebrating on Naboo really, really funny. It is nonetheless a good link back to that setup. The galaxy seems to have risen up in celebration. Palpatine's getting his statue toppled. Just perfect. Great signaling as to what's happening. The Battle of Endor has the advantage of being part of the final sequence of the trilogy, so it gets to have this ending, where realistically we could have left it forever, and that would have been fine. I'm fortunate in the sense that I'm old enough that I can kind of cut off most of the rot mentally, but that's where we have to leave it for now, because I'm about to do a whole other series of rants, and it is actually getting kind of late, and I'm kind of knackered because I did go to like an adult bouncy castle thing earlier. Not adult like that, like for adults, not that kind of adult. God, what am I talking about? So my final thoughts on the Battle of Endor, very cool. I hope I made the case that the Battle of Endor is at least worthy of consideration in the best space battles conversations you nerds will obviously have with your friends. If not, then certainly a gold standard of them. I know it's not necessarily a controversial pick, but blame the patrons, they voted for this, and I had my pick locked in from day one, and they knew it. They knew it. Alright, that's enough now. So everyone, you tell me what your pick is and how wrong I am. I know you want to do it, so just go do it, and I'll thank the patrons and everyone, and we can all celebrate the end of this video. So I want to thank Molto, who made the thumbnail for this video. It's excellent, and I want to thank my proofreader, who also sat with me through watching some of the space battles. I really appreciate them both. They do excellent things for the channel. If you have enjoyed the video, please remember to like, comment, subscribe. Those are really easy ways to help the channel. I don't know if like the hype thing exists, but if you have that, I guess I would appreciate that. I don't really know how that works, but you can stick to the good old like, comment, subscribe, and that'll probably be good. I also need to thank the patrons and members. If you really, really like the video, if you really want more of the media thing, because we're doing a bit of a media thing now, a really good way to signal that is not just to subscribe, but also to join the Patreon, so you can keep voting for the media topics and keep suggesting media topics to me. But for now, I need to thank the top tier patrons: Drone Riff, Mercutio, Kazi Scheider, John N, Liron, Jar Jar Muba, and Carolyn. Absolute legends. And also the YouTube members: Nadir Jiwa, Katie Marshall, Roger Zugi, Scaly Bubble, and Ben Johnson. Thank you to them. I am going to, I've got to really dig in and really pull something interesting off for the next video, because I've got a pretty hard deadline for it. So if you don't hear from me for a few days, if I'm not on stream, if I'm not doing anything, it's because I've completely locked into getting this video ready because I need it out by the meme date for this particular franchise. Otherwise, it's not the end of the world. But you should be looking forward to that video because it's one I've wanted to do for ages. And with that, everyone, thank you so much. I will catch you on the next video. Take it easy and bye-bye.